Have you ever heard silence louder than gunfire? Northern Syria, moonless night. A SEAL team forced to retreat under heavy fire, leaving their sniper behind after she went dark on comms. Command declared her KIA, her boots placed at a memorial. Her team carried the weight of abandonment, replaying the decision that haunted them. Then, 3 days later, alarms screamed across the base as an impossible figure breached the perimeter, and the woman they mourned walked back through the gate, alive, covered in blood, and ready to rewrite everything they thought they knew about survival. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories of resilience and quiet strength, consider subscribing. This is a story that demands to be heard. She didn't just survive, she hunted her way home. The night vision footage flickered green and grainy, casting the ruins of northern Syria in an alien glow. 12 miles from the extraction point, SEAL Team 8 moved through the skeletal remains of an industrial complex, their boots silent against broken concrete. The mission had been clean until it wasn't. A high-value target secured, intel gathered, and then the world erupted in muzzle flashes from 3 directions at once. The ambush was coordinated, methodical, and it turned exfiltration into a fight for survival in seconds. 800 meters to the northeast, perched in the crumbling upper floor of what used to be a grain silo, callsign Revenant adjusted her scope. Her real name didn't matter out here. Names were for home, for people who knew you before the uniform. Out here, she was a set of eyes, a steady hand, and 11 pounds of precision engineering. She watched the chaos unfold below through thermal imaging, counting hostiles, calculating angles, waiting for the call. It came through her earpiece, sharp and controlled. Lieutenant Garvin Haskell's voice cut through the static. Suppress northern rooftops. She didn't respond with words, just squeezed the trigger. The suppressed rifle coughed twice. 2 heat signatures dropped. A third shifted position, trying to flank the team below. She adjusted, breathed out, fired, 3 down. The team pushed forward, using the brief window she'd created. Then the world tilted. Incoming fire raked across her position, chewing through the already weakened structure. Concrete dust filled the air. She repositioned, moving low, keeping her silhouette broken. Her voice stayed level when she keyed the radio. Actual, taking fire from grid 3-7. I'm repositioning. She moved to secondary cover, a gap in the wall that gave her a narrow field of fire but better concealment. That's when she felt it. Not pain, not yet. Just the impact. A 7.62 round caught her right shoulder, the plate carrier absorbing most of the energy, but not all of it. The force spun her partially, and she knew immediately the clavicle had fractured. She pressed herself against the wall, breathing through the shock. Her right arm wouldn't lift the rifle properly anymore. Below, the firefight intensified. RPGs streaked across the night. Haskell's voice came through again, tight with controlled urgency. Revenant, can you reach Rally Point Alpha? She looked at the distance, the open ground, the shifting patterns of enemy movement. They were boxing her in, whether they knew she was here or were just covering probable sniper positions. Either way, the math was clear. Negative. I'm locked down, can't move without exposing. She applied pressure to the shoulder with her left hand, feeling the wet warmth spreading despite the plate carrier. The pain was starting to arrive now, sharp and insistent. She reached for her med kit, working one-handed, pulling combat gauze. Don't come back for me. Complete the mission. The words came out steady. She'd run the scenarios 100 times in training, played out the calculus of acceptable loss. 8 operators and 30-plus hostiles between her position and theirs. The numbers didn't work. In the ruins below, Chief Boone Thatcher was already moving toward her last known position. Haskell grabbed his vest, physical, urgent. The lieutenant's face was stone, but his eyes betrayed the war happening behind them. We've got 8 men and 30 hostiles between us and her. We go back, we all die. Thatcher's jaw worked. We don't leave people. The creed was absolute, trained into them until it was reflex. Haskell's response was quieter, harder. We don't sacrifice 8 for 1. Revenant heard the exchange through the open channel. She knew what was coming, knew the weight Haskell was carrying in that moment. She made it easier for him. Actual, I'm going dark, don't risk it. Then she switched off her radio before he could respond, before the order became a debate. The silence in her ear was immediate and absolute. She was alone now, by choice, and that clarity brought a strange kind of calm. Haskell called her name twice. The team held position, weapons trained outward, waiting for a response that wouldn't come. The enemy fire was intensifying, closing the window. Haskell's voice when he made the call was hollow. All units, break contact. We're moving to secondary extract. Revenant is gone. The words hung in the air like smoke. Thatcher looked back toward her position one last time before following the team into the darkness. Behind them, the ruins fell silent except for the sporadic crack of gunfire and the low voices of enemy fighters regrouping. 30 minutes later, the extraction helicopter lifted off, rotors beating against the night sky. Inside, the team sat in silence. Elian Cross, the comms specialist, was young, maybe 24, with the kind of sharp awareness that made him good at his job and terrible at letting things go. He stared at the radio mounted on the bulkhead, replaying her last transmission in his head. The calm in her voice, the clarity. It didn't sound like someone panicking. It sounded like someone making a choice. Command processed the mission report with the efficiency of an organization that had done this too many times. Operator declared KIA. Remains unrecoverable. Casualty notification pending. The words turned a person into a file into a statistic. By the time the helicopter touched down at the forward operating base, her status was already updated in the system. The red text was final. Deceased. The debriefing room smelled like old coffee and fluorescent lights. Haskell delivered his report to the colonel with the kind of clinical precision that came from years of compartmentalizing. We held position as long as tactically feasible. No recovery possible without additional casualties. The decision was sound given available intel and threat assessment. The colonel, a career officer with more deployments than most people had birthdays, nodded slowly. You made the right call, Lieutenant. The words were supposed to be reassuring. They landed like stones. But Thatcher didn't look reassured. He sat in the corner, jaw tight, eyes fixed on a point somewhere past the wall. Cross kept his hands busy, fingers drumming against his knee in a rhythm that matched nothing. Haskell wrote and rewrote the letter to her family, each draft worse than the last. How do you explain leaving someone behind to people who weren't there, who couldn't understand the impossible math of combat decisions? He crumpled the third attempt and started again. That night, the barracks were too quiet. Thatcher cleaned his rifle for the third time, the repetitive motion a kind of meditation. Cross sat with his headphones on, but the audio file he was listening to wasn't music. It was the mission recording, her voice, the silence after. He rewound it, played it again, searching for something he couldn't name. Around them, the rest of the team tried to sleep and failed. The memorial was held 2 days later. Her boots stood at attention, laces tied the way she always tied them, double knotted and tight. Her rifle, the one she'd carried on 47 missions, rested against a simple wooden stand. Her helmet sat on top, the worn padding inside still shaped to her head. Haskell spoke, his voice cracking once on a word he didn't expect to break him. Thatcher stood at attention, eyes forward, jaw working. Cross didn't attend. He was in the comms room, scanning enemy chatter, looking for patterns. Whispers moved through the base like weather. She knew the risks. If she'd held position longer, maybe she panicked. The words were never said directly, never loud enough to be challenged, but they were there. The unspoken question underneath all of it. Could she have done more? Should she have? The doubt was insidious, the kind that infected even the people who knew better. Thatcher couldn't let it go. He found Haskell in the operations center, pulled him aside with the kind of urgency that bypassed rank. We should have gone back. Haskell's response was immediate, defensive. Anne died with her. That's not honor, that's suicide. Thatcher stepped closer. You don't know she's dead. The words hung between them. Haskell's face hardened. She took a round to the shoulder. No comms, no movement, surrounded. Do the math, Chief. But the math didn't satisfy Thatcher. He knew her record. Knew what she'd survived before. The questions kept coming, quiet and persistent, undermining the certainty everyone else seemed to accept. Cross found it late on the second night. He'd been combing through intercepted communications, the kind of signals intelligence work that was 99% noise and 1% revelation. Enemy chatter about ghost activity near the extraction zone, a patrol that went dark. No gunfire reported, just silence. He showed Thatcher the transcript, hands shaking slightly. Thatcher read it twice. That's her methodology. The words were barely a whisper. Cross pulled up the thermal satellite archive, the kind of imagery that required clearance he technically didn't have, but no one was watching at 2 a.m. He scrolled back to the night of the mission, focusing on the grid coordinates of her last known position. The footage was grainy, the thermal signatures bleeding together, but he enhanced it, isolated the timeline. At 0347 hours, 2 hours after the team had left her, a heat signature moved. It wasn't the jerky motion of someone scanning. It wasn't the stillness of the dead. It was slow, methodical, deliberate. It was crawling. Thatcher leaned in close to the screen, his breath fogging slightly against the cold glow. His voice when he spoke was quiet, certain, and edged with something between hope and dread. She's alive. If you've ever questioned a decision that haunted you, or known someone who refused to give up when everyone else had, share your story below. And if this resonates with you, subscribe. Some truths take time to surface. The thermal footage played on loop, the heat signature moving with agonizing slowness across the screen. Cross and Thatcher brought it to Haskell at 0200 hours, the kind of time when the base ran on skeleton crew and bad coffee. Haskell was still awake, hadn't really slept since the extraction. He looked at the screen, then at them, his expression hardening into something that resembled anger but felt more like fear. Thermal ghosts, equipment malfunction, confirmation bias. You're seeing what you want to see. His voice was steady, but the words came too fast, too defensive. Thatcher stepped closer, lowering his voice to the register reserved for hard truths between operators who'd bled together. Or, you're not seeing what you don't want to face. The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Haskell's jaw tightened. She's gone. We move on. That's an order. He turned away before either of them could respond, ending the conversation through sheer force of rank. But orders didn't stop Thatcher. That night, he violated protocol in ways that could end a career. He pulled her mission files from the classified system, bypassing security measures that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of access. The files loaded slowly, each page revealing operations that shouldn't exist on paper. 72 hours alone behind enemy lines in Yemen, no support, no backup, emerging with intelligence that changed the operational landscape for 6 months. Urban sniper craft in Fallujah, 0 friendly casualties, 11 confirmed kills, and no one saw her enter or leave the zone. Her SEER training scores were flagged in red, top 1% in the program's history. Instructors had noted her capacity for patience, her ability to turn environment into advantage, her refusal to break under conditions designed to break everyone. Cross read over his shoulder, his face pale in the monitor's glow. She's not just a sniper, she's a ghost. The words felt inadequate. They were looking at a record that documented someone operating at the edge of human capability, someone who'd made a career of doing what shouldn't be possible. Thatcher closed the file, but the information stayed with him, rewriting the narrative he had accepted. She hadn't panicked. She'd made a tactical decision. And if she'd survived this long, there was no telling what she was capable of. Cross went deeper into the intercepted communications, pulling everything from the 72 hours following the mission. What he found was a pattern. 3 separate incidents, each one isolated, each one strange enough to merit attention, but not enough to trigger alarms. A sentry post that went silent during a routine check. No distress call, no sign of struggle. Just empty positions and abandoned weapons. A patrol that disappeared near a dried riverbed, their radio chatter stopping mid-sentence. A command vehicle found abandoned 3 kilometers from a supply route. The driver's door open, engine still running, no trace of the occupants. Thatcher traced the incidents on a map, marking each location with a red pin. They formed a corridor, a narrow path through hostile territory that ran from her last known position toward friendly lines. The spacing was deliberate, the timing calculated. She wasn't just surviving, she was hunting her way out, eliminating threats, creating a path where none existed. Cross stared at the map, his hands shaking slightly. Or, we're seeing patterns that aren't there. His voice lacked conviction. Thatcher met his eyes. You believe that? It wasn't a question. Cross didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. The pattern suggested movement, progress. Someone with enough tactical awareness to avoid detection while simultaneously removing obstacles. It suggested training, discipline, and a level of operational capability that most people couldn't maintain under ideal conditions, let alone with a fractured clavicle and no support. Thatcher found himself calculating distances, timelines, physical limitations. The math was brutal, but not impossible, not for someone like her. Command remained unconvinced. The colonel listened to their evidence with the patience of someone humoring subordinates, then dismissed it with bureaucratic efficiency. Unconfirmed reports, circumstantial evidence, the fog of war creating phantom connections. The official position remained unchanged. She was KIA, the file was closed. Casualty notifications were being prepared. Thatcher and Cross were advised to focus on the next mission, the next objective. Grief was natural, but it couldn't interfere with operational readiness. The base settled into an uneasy rhythm. Training continued, briefings happened, equipment was maintained. But underneath the routine, something had shifted. Operators who'd served with her found themselves replaying missions, remembering the way she worked, the patience, the precision, the absolute calm under conditions that shredded most people's composure. She'd never been loud, never demanded attention, but her absence created a void that everyone felt without quite being able to articulate. Day 3 arrived with the weight of finality. 72 hours since the extraction, the timeline that separated hope from acceptance. Thatcher barely slept, spending his time between the comms room and the map, searching for new evidence, new patterns. Cross monitored every frequency, every intercepted signal, looking for the ghost that might not exist. Haskell wrote the final report, the one that would make her death official in ways that transcended status updates and casualty notifications. At 2300 hours, the alarm shattered the night. Perimeter breach, eastern fence line. The announcement came through base-wide communications with the kind of urgency that meant this wasn't a drill. Guards scrambled, weapons hot, moving toward the breach point with practiced efficiency. The eastern fence bordered open ground, a kill zone designed to prevent exactly this kind of incursion. Nothing should have made it through undetected. The fact that something had meant either catastrophic failure of multiple security systems or something operating beyond normal parameters. Haskell, Thatcher, and Cross ran toward the main gate, joining the stream of personnel responding to the alert. Floodlights snapped on, turning night into artificial day, casting harsh shadows across the compound. Guards had formed a perimeter, weapons raised, training their sights on a single figure stumbling toward them from the darkness beyond the fence. The figure was human, barely, covered in layers of dried mud and dust that obscured features and uniform alike. Moving with a pronounced limp, favoring the left leg, right arm held close to the body in a makeshift sling, fashioned from what looked like torn fabric and paracord. The gait was uneven but purposeful, each step deliberate despite obvious pain. Distance made details impossible, but the silhouette was wrong for local fighters, wrong for the usual threats. A guard's voice cracked across the night. "Identify yourself." The command was standard, backed by a dozen weapons trained on center mass. The figure didn't stop, didn't raise hands, just continued forward into the light with the kind of momentum that suggested stopping wasn't an option. 20 meters, 15. The guard's fingers tightened on triggers, rules of engagement cycling through trained minds. Then the figure stepped fully into the floodlights. The mud and dust couldn't hide everything. The build, the way she moved despite the injuries, the absolute refusal to stop or show weakness. Recognition hit like a physical blow. The guard who'd challenged her lowered his weapon slowly, the muzzle dropping as his hands began to shake. His voice when he spoke was barely a whisper, but it carried in the sudden silence. Holy God. It was Revenant. She walked past him without acknowledgement, her focus fixed on the command building ahead. Her face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp under the grime, eyes sunken but absolutely clear. The makeshift sling held her right arm immobile, dark stains visible on the fabric beneath. Her uniform was shredded in places, repaired with field-expedient methods that spoke to days of constant movement. She left footprints of dried mud with each step, a trail of evidence that she'd walked through hell to get here. Thatcher stopped running, frozen 10 meters from her, his face cycling through emotions too fast to name. Cross's voice broke on a curse that dissolved into disbelief. Haskell stood in the doorway of the operations center, his face drained of color, looking at a ghost made flesh. She walked into the operations center with the same purposeful stride, ignoring the dozen personnel who'd frozen at their stations. She moved to the main briefing table, reached across with her left hand, and placed 2 items on the surface with deliberate care. A blood-stained map, folded and refolded until the creases were white. A spent magazine, the kind used in her rifle, scratched and dented. Then she straightened, meeting Haskell's eyes across the room. "You're dead." The words came out strangled, somewhere between question and statement. Haskell looked like he was seeing something that violated the fundamental laws of reality. She held his gaze. Her voice when she spoke was rough from days without proper water, but absolutely steady. "You wrote me off." The room held its breath. Every person present understood they were witnessing something that would be replayed, analyzed, and referenced for years. This wasn't just an operator returning from a mission. This was a judgment, delivered by someone who had every right to render it. The colonel entered, drawn by the commotion, and stopped dead when he saw her. "Operator, we need to understand." He was trying to reassert control, to bring order to a situation that had already blown past standard protocols. She turned to face him, cutting him off with a look that needed no words. "I survived. You didn't." Wait. The accusation was simple, factual, devastating. Haskell tried to explain, the words coming fast, defensive. "We had no confirmation. You went dark." "We couldn't," she interrupted, her voice level and cold as surgical steel. "I went dark because I was compromised. Answering comms would have given away my position. You were trained to know that." The words landed like individual blows. Every operator in the room had been through the same training, understood the same protocols. Radio silence in a compromised position wasn't panic, it was doctrine. The implication hung unspoken. They should have known, should have trusted, should have waited. Haskell's face drained further. Thatcher closed his eyes. Cross looked like he'd been struck. She continued, and now there was something else in her voice. Not anger, something colder. "I made the call so you wouldn't have to. I knew if I answered, you'd come back, and I knew it would get you killed." She let that settle, let them understand the weight she'd carried while they'd been writing reports and holding memorials. Then she delivered the final truth, the one that reframed everything. "I didn't survive by waiting for rescue." The words created a void of silence that felt physical. Because if she hadn't waited, if she hadn't hidden, then what had she done? How had she covered the distance? How had she dealt with the patrols, the checkpoints, the hostile territory that should have been insurmountable for someone wounded and alone? The questions multiplied, each one building on the last, creating a picture that defied everything they thought they knew about operational limits. Her rifle was still slung across her back, covered in the same mud and dust that coated everything else. But now, in the harsh light of the operations center, details became visible. Scratches on the stock, wear patterns that suggested recent repeated use, and something else. Marks. 12 of them, carved into the wood with methodical precision. Thatcher's eyes found them, counted them, and his expression shifted into something between awe and horror. The official after-action report documented 9 enemy casualties from her position, confirmed kills before she went dark. But there were 12 marks. 3 were unaccounted for. 3 kills that happened after they'd left her, after she'd been declared dead. The implications were staggering. She hadn't just survived. She'd continued the mission, wounded, alone, written off. She'd turned defensive survival into offensive operations. She'd hunted. If you've ever been underestimated when you were at your strongest, or watched someone prove the impossible while others doubted, let us know in the comments. And if you want to see how this ends, subscribe. The truth is just beginning. The colonel gestured toward a chair. She ignored it, remaining standing despite the visible strain in her posture. Medics hovered near the doorway, medical kits ready, but one look from her kept them at distance. She was operating on something beyond adrenaline now, something that had carried her through 3 days of impossible terrain and wouldn't let her collapse until the mission was truly complete. The briefing room filled as word spread. Operators arriving in ones and twos, drawn by reports that defied belief. "Operator, walk us through it." The colonel's voice had shifted from command to something closer to request. This wasn't about protocol anymore. This was about understanding how someone had rewritten the limits of human endurance. She nodded once, a small gesture that cost visible effort, and began speaking in the flat, precise tone of an after-action report delivered by someone who'd lived every word. Took a 7.62 round through the right shoulder. Didn't fully penetrate body armor, but the impact fractured the clavicle. Applied pressure, combat gauze, self-tourniquet using my rifle sling. She gestured to the sling with her left hand, the movement mechanical, clinical. Heard the team pull back. Counted 12 hostiles within 200 meters of my position. They were conducting a sweep pattern, methodical, checking probable sniper hides. The room was absolutely silent. Every person present understood the math of what she was describing. 12 hostiles, 1 wounded operator, no support, no extraction. The kind of scenario that appeared in worst-case training exercises, the kind you weren't expected to survive so much as manage until death arrived. She continued without emotion, each sentence adding another layer to an impossible picture. Waited 4 hours. Let them think the area was clear. Her voice remained steady, factual. They'd cycled through 3 search patterns, each one less thorough than the last. Overconfidence. They believed their initial sweep had been comprehensive. At 0430 hours, 3 sentries established observation posts on likely egress routes. Standard counter-sniper doctrine. She paused, and something that might have been approval flickered across her face. They were well-trained. Eliminated 3 sentries, suppressed weapon, subsonic ammunition. No one heard. The words were matter-of-fact, describing actions that required impossible precision under impossible conditions. A fractured clavicle meant her dominant shoulder was compromised. Shooting left-handed with a long rifle, at distance, maintaining the accuracy necessary for clean kills. The operators listening understood exactly how difficult that was. Most couldn't do it fresh and uninjured on a range, let alone after hours of bleeding and pain. Crawled 6 miles through irrigation ditches and rubble fields. Moved only during prayer calls when ambient noise provided cover. Avoided 2 patrols using thermal discipline. She described burying herself in mud, using standing water to mask heat signature, remaining motionless for hours while enemy fighters passed within meters. The level of patience required, the absolute control over breathing and movement, the capacity to override every survival instinct, screaming to run. It was the kind of fieldcraft that took years to develop and iron discipline to execute, navigated by stars and enemy patrol patterns, used their predictability to identify safe corridors. They maintained regular routes, regular timing. I mapped their movements over 18 hours, found the gaps. Her description was analytical, almost academic, as if she were teaching a class rather than recounting her own survival. Every observation post has blind spots. Every patrol has rhythm. I used both. Cross spoke up, his voice hesitant. The enemy chatter we intercepted, the incidents. She nodded. A command vehicle, 2 roving patrols, 1 observation post, all within my egress route, all eliminated or neutralized. She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The word neutralize covered a range of actions, none of them gentle. The patrol found dead near the riverbed. The vehicle abandoned with its occupants missing. The sentry posts that went silent. Those weren't random events. They were deliberate, surgical removals of obstacles. Reached friendly lines 68 hours after being declared KIA. Traveled on foot approximately 43 miles through hostile territory. The distance seemed impossible. The timeline seemed impossible. But she was standing here, covered in the evidence of every mile, every hour. Her boots were destroyed, the soles nearly separated from the uppers. Her uniform showed repairs made with whatever materials she'd found. Paracord, strips of fabric, wire, the kind of field expedient work that spoke to someone who'd run out of standard supplies and improvised with whatever remained. The colonel asked the question everyone was thinking. "Why didn't you answer when we called?" His voice was quiet, almost gentle. This wasn't interrogation. This was something closer to confession. She turned to face Haskell directly, and for the first time since entering the room, emotion flickered across her face. Not anger, something more complex, something that looked like understanding mixed with disappointment, because I knew you'd come back, and I knew it would get you killed. The words were simple, but they carried weight that pressed down on everyone present. She'd made the hardest call an operator could make, not just accepting her own death, but forcing her team to accept it, removing their choice to mount a rescue that would have resulted in additional casualties. I made the call, so you didn't have to. She held Haskell's gaze. You were following doctrine. I was buying you time to follow it. The absolution landed harder than any accusation could have. She wasn't angry they'd left. She'd planned for them to leave, had forced them to, by going dark, by removing the possibility of communication, by making the tactical math clear and brutal. 8 lives versus 1. The doctrine was sound. The call was correct. But that didn't make it easier to live with. Cross found his voice, barely above a whisper. The patrols we found. The ones that went missing. She nodded, confirming what they had already guessed. I didn't survive by hiding. I survived by hunting. The statement reframed everything. She hadn't been a fugitive moving through enemy territory. She'd been a predator, wounded but far from helpless, turning defensive survival into offensive operations. Every obstacle became a target. Every patrol that might have found her instead disappeared, leaving gaps in enemy coverage that she exploited for movement. Thatcher released a breath that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. You went offensive, while wounded, alone. The admiration in his voice was unmistakable. It was the kind of action that belonged in training scenarios designed to illustrate impossible standards, not in actual operations. But here she stood, living proof that impossible was a flexible term. She didn't answer, didn't need to confirm what was already obvious. Instead, she finally allowed herself to sit, the movement controlled, but revealing the cost of remaining upright for so long. The medics moved forward immediately, and this time she didn't wave them off. Her part was done, the report delivered, the truth laid bare. Haskell stepped forward, and for the first time since she'd walked in, his composure cracked. His hands shook slightly. His voice broke on the first word. I thought we lost you. The words carried everything he hadn't been able to say in the reports, the briefings, the memorial, the weight of command, the burden of the call, the haunting question of whether different choices might have led to different outcomes. She met his eyes, her expression softening slightly. You didn't lose me. You let me go. The distinction mattered. It wasn't abandonment. It wasn't failure. It was tactical necessity, executed correctly based on available information. She'd engineered her own abandonment to save her team. He'd followed protocol to preserve operational capability. Both decisions were sound. Both decisions carried cost. Don't be sorry, be better. The words hung in the air, a challenge and a benediction. Not accusation, but instruction. Learn from this. Adapt, improve. She wasn't looking for apologies or explanations. She was looking forward to the next mission, the next impossible situation, the next moment when the math would be brutal and the calls would be hard. The colonel stood slowly, deliberately. He came to attention and rendered a salute that had nothing to do with regulation and everything to do with respect. Recognition of something that transcended rank or protocol. One by one, every operator in the room followed. Thatcher, Cross. Finally, Haskell, his hand rising with visible effort, acknowledging not just her survival, but what that survival represented. She didn't return it immediately. Just looked at them, reading faces, measuring the moment. Then she stood, despite the medic's protests, and brought her left, hand up in return. The salute was crisp despite the injuries, despite the exhaustion, despite everything. Because some things mattered more than pain. The medics finally got their way, guiding her toward the door and the medical facility beyond. As she passed Cross, he noticed details he'd missed before, the rifle still slung across her back, the stock visible now in better light, the 12 marks carved into the wood with methodical precision. He'd counted the confirmed kills from the official report, 9 before she went dark. But there were 12 marks. He whispered to Thatcher, his voice carrying equal parts awe and unease. She didn't tell them everything. Thatcher's expression suggested he'd already reached the same conclusion. Some operations didn't make it into reports. Some actions were better left as marks on a rifle stock, testimony to what happened in the hours between being declared dead and walking back through the gate alive. 1 week later, the base had returned to its rhythm, but the rhythm had changed in subtle ways. Haskell rewrote the after-action report with brutal honesty. Operator was prematurely declared KIA due to communications failure and insufficient intelligence. Recommend comprehensive protocol review. He didn't hide the mistake, didn't soften the language, owned it completely because that's what she'd done and that's what leadership demanded. At the next command briefing, new protocols were introduced. No operator declared KIA without visual confirmation or 72-hour elapsed time. No exceptions. Haskell delivered the briefing without looking at her, but everyone present knew why the protocols existed. They were written in the negative space of her absence, in the 3 days she'd spent proving that declared death and actual death were different things. Thatcher visited her in medical the day before she was cleared to return to duty. He didn't say anything, just placed a cup of coffee on the table beside her bunk. She nodded, the gesture carrying weight that words couldn't. Some conversations didn't need language. Some debts couldn't be paid, only acknowledged. She returned to rotation 2 weeks after walking through the gate. Medical cleared, psych cleared, command cleared. Her first mission back was Overwatch, the same role she'd been performing when everything went wrong. The team moved through hostile territory with the same precision, the same discipline. But when her voice came through comms, calm and steady, reporting position and confirming sightlines, everyone listened a little closer, paid a little more attention, trusted a little more deeply. The story ended where it began, on Overwatch in hostile territory. Scope trained downrange, voice steady on the comms. But everything had changed. The team knew what she was capable of, knew what she'd survived, knew that the quiet voice providing coordinates and threat assessment belonged to someone who'd redefined the standard for what one operator could accomplish when every variable turned against them. They say no one gets left behind, but the truth is more complicated. Sometimes the person you leave behind refuses to stay gone. She didn't survive because she was lucky. She survived because she was ready. Ready to be forgotten, ready to fight alone, ready to prove that the standard isn't what you expect, but what you become when no one's watching. They wrote her name on a memorial. She erased it herself, one methodical step at a time, through 43 miles of impossible terrain and 3 days of calculated survival. Have you ever witnessed quiet strength that changed everything, or known someone who rewrote the rules simply by refusing to accept them? Share your thoughts below. And if stories of resilience and unspoken courage resonate with you, consider subscribing. Some truths are worth remembering.